So, as November continues to roll on, we all continue to wait for some kind of official update from Nintendo about the next generation. Is it going to happen this year before 2024 is over? Is it going to happen next year, after the new year in 2025, before the end of March like they told us? We don't yet know, and I've discussed many times in recent weeks how I still want to hold out hope that we might still see the reveal happen in 2024. I don't think it's impossible. I think there really could be an 11th hour reveal in November, before Black Friday, maybe even in December. All of these things are possible, but they're obviously looking less and less likely with each passing day and each passing month. So regardless of that, whether it's going to happen in November, whether it's going to happen in December, whether it's going to happen after the new year, whatever it is, we're just waiting to see what's going to go down. But of course, with the anticipation of the next generation from Nintendo also comes the anticipation of new games to play on the next generation console, on the Switch 2. What games will be available on launch day, within the launch window, in the first launch year, and beyond all of that. I've talked quite a bit in my last video and in several recent videos about all the theories about which games are going to be available on the Switch or the Switch 2 or cross-generation releases. Obviously, I've talked a ton about Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, and I'm sticking to my guns that I think that game is going to be available to play on both the Switch and the Switch 2. And I'm not factoring in the backwards compatibility concept because I think most of us believe that that will happen anyway, and that obviously changes all of these things. But I do still think that there's going to be some sort of definitive experience on the Switch 2 for Metroid Prime 4. We also know Pokemon ZA is another huge, brand new game coming out in 2025 that I also think could be getting a next-gen or cross-gen release and something that they can market as a definitive next-gen experience on the Switch 2. You know, these are all theories and things that I personally believe and discussed many times. But what I actually want to do in this video, we're not talking about Metroid Prime 4, Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition, Pokemon ZA, none of that stuff. I want to talk about some other franchises, long dormant IPs and franchises that I hope make a return on the Switch 2 and that I also think very likely could make a return on the Switch 2. It's worth noting that one of the Switch's many strengths is how many franchises and IPs made a return on the console. Games like Luigi's Mansion 3 or Bayonetta 3, 2D Metroid like Metroid Dread, the fact that we're getting the return of Metroid Prime 4 even, and we know will be a Switch title, that's a huge one. 2D Zelda games made a return, Kirby made a return, even Pikmin, we got Pikmin 4. Lots of great games and IPs and franchises and spin-offs of games that we love all had a chance and an opportunity to come back on the Nintendo Switch because it was so successful and popular. And there's plenty of others I'm not even mentioning. I'm just rattling a few off the top of my head here. It's a really big deal. And so I want to now jump into a few IPs and franchises that I think also deserve their own return specifically on the next generation Nintendo Switch 2. Also, really quickly before I jump into that stuff, I want to let you guys know I've been doing this YouTube thing for a long time, just over 11 years now. So something I'm hoping to do in the next year or 2 years is to finally cross 30,000 subscribers. So if you're watching this video, you're not subscribed, then I certainly hope you consider subscribing. So the first franchise that I want to talk about is the most important to me that deserves a triumphant return on the Nintendo Switch 2, and that is Star Fox. Because as crazy as it is for us all to stop and think about, Star Fox has not been revisited on the Nintendo Switch. It has totally skipped the Nintendo Switch generation, which is really crazy to me, and it's very sad. I think a lot of us know that part of what probably fed into that is that Star Fox Zero, the last new Star Fox game, released at the end of the Wii U's life, by the way, was not the best received. A lot of people didn't love it. It didn't sell all that great, you know, on a console that itself wasn't a big success, right? So there was a lot working against Star Fox Zero, and admittedly, even though if you commit to learning the controls, it's fantastic, there is a steep learning curve for Star Fox Zero. It's one of the biggest criticisms I have of the game, which again, I say as a big fan. I still own Star Fox Zero. I've played it many, many times. I really, really like the game. Far from the best, and it definitely has its issues and its quirks, but it's a really good game. I like what they were going for, but they need something a little bit more tried and true. And it's an old franchise, man. It goes back to the Super Nintendo. I'll never forget the first time I saw it, like in a KB toy store, and I was able to play it a little bit. And it was just amazing. Those 3D polygon graphics, even in 16-bit in 1991, my little 11-year-old brain couldn't comprehend it. And then I went on to play it on my own Super Nintendo, or my friend's Super Nintendo, I should say, that we kind of ended up sort of adopting as our own for a long time. Those weird things we did back in the 90s when we were kids playing video games. Games and consoles just kind of swapped houses. It is what it is. But I got a lot of Star Fox time in. Star Fox 64, one of the best games ever made, one of my favorite games. I'm also a massive fan of Star Fox Adventures, which I still have on my GameCube and I play every once in a while. And so this is all just for me to say that Star Fox is a mascot, long-running classic character and franchise that really is popular and deserves a return. Since it skipped the Switch entirely, it deserves a return on the next generation. And it's worth noting, it's the kind of game that could showcase fantastic next-gen graphics and visuals. It could have wonderful and fun, repetitive arcade gameplay, and it would be a great boost for Nintendo Switch Online, because I would find it surprising if they were to ever make and release a new Star Fox game and not have a heavy online component. Dogfighting, competitive, cooperative, whatever you want to do there. Even for the campaign, if there's a way to do like a cooperative campaign. What if you could play campaign missions where someone is Fox and someone is Peppy and someone is even Slippy, you know? I mean, it just works perfectly. And so going into the Switch 2, if they want to continue to boost NSO subscriptions, I think Star Fox works well for that. So that is easily the #1 franchise I want to see return on the Switch 2. Another franchise that won't be a surprise to anyone that I want to see return on the Switch 2 is F-Zero. That's been in the conversation for a very, very long time. Now, I don't want to take away anything from the fact that F-Zero 99 released not that long ago. I think it was last year, right, in 2023? And, I want to get ahead of this now before people bring up F-Zero 99. It's great that F-Zero 99 exists. You know, it's a unique thing. It's not really the tried and true, like, next console F-Zero sequel game that we're really, truly looking for. But for what it is, something that you have to already be paying $50 a year for the Switch Online expansion pack, and it's an online-only game. And that is what it is. They keep releasing new content, so it's a great value if you already subscribe to NSO, and so that's fine. I dabbled a little bit the first couple of days just to try it. I love that it's a remix of SNES courses and that 16-bit vibe, because I love that vibe and I love the original F-Zero. But, it's its own unique thing in its own unique bubble, as like a bonus for online stuff only. It's not really the new game we want that would be a sequel to F-Zero GX on the GameCube. And I'm not talking about even the Game Boy Advance F-Zero games, which are also great. But we all love F-Zero GX. I still own and play that game. Let's get another console game. And honestly, you can make the same case for F-Zero that I did for Star Fox. It's going to boast fantastic graphics, great fun, repetitive, arcadey gameplay because it's a racing game, and another fantastic candidate for pushing NSO subscriptions, because we know it would also feature a heavy online component. Just like I think Star Fox would, F-Zero would be the same. Online F-Zero racing matches has been the dream for like decades, man. I mean, look at what Mario Kart's been able to achieve with its online component there. F-Zero, it will never be as successful or popular as Mario Kart, but it could do the same thing conceptually. And so, yeah, I know I'm kind of preaching to the choir here when I say this, but F-Zero is the perfect candidate to make a return on the Switch 2. Now, of course, the next one we have to talk about is Donkey Kong. And this one is a no-brainer, and it's also the only one of all of these games I'm going to talk about that, for all intents and purposes, I feel pretty comfortable saying will happen. I think we all know that Nintendo has to be working on another Donkey Kong game behind the scenes, and the fact that it hasn't been released or confirmed for the Switch up until this point at the end of 2024 is because it's probably going to be a Switch 2 game and or a cross-gen release, right? So it's going to be something revealed maybe alongside of the Switch 2 or promoted for the Switch 2, even if it's also playable on the Switch 1. Whatever they're going to do there, I think Donkey Kong's return is imminent. I think we're going to know about it and see it confirmed in 2025. And I'm really hoping it's something that is designed or marketed for the Switch 2, because just like all of these games I'm talking about, the benefit to having them release on the Switch 2 is to see the better power and graphics afforded to these franchises. And Donkey Kong, I mean, it's another classic old school mascot, just like Star Fox, only way, way older. And, the Donkey Kong games have always been great. The Donkey Kong Country games have always been great. And in fact, this year, despite being an old man who grew up playing the N64 when I was a teenager, and I even just made a video explaining why it's my favorite console of all time, I had never played Donkey Kong 64. Like, the only big exclusive 64 game I never played in its day. And so last year, or maybe it was earlier this year, I can't remember. Actually, I think it was this year. I finally purchased a copy of Donkey Kong 64 for my 64, and I've been slowly working through it this year, and it's been a ton of fun to revisit that game, or revisit that kind of game on the N64, I should say. And so, all the Donkey Kong Country games are great. We're getting an HD port of the Wii Donkey Kong Country Returns early next year in 2025, but what about a brand new game? Whether it's another 2D game, whether it's a 3D game, if it's continuing the Donkey Kong Country moniker, or if they're going to maybe sidestep and go in a slightly different direction, which I kind of hope they do. I think Donkey Kong Country, or Donkey Kong, I should say, is coming soon, and I would be shocked if it's not some kind of a major Switch 2 release. Okay, let's get a little bit more into some of the few more obscure IPs that I want to talk about today. And I want to talk about Kid Icarus, and I know some people will say it's not obscure. Other people might disagree. I think it kind of falls into that category to a degree. It's well known, obviously, but it's not like when you think of Donkey Kong or even Star Fox, I don't think Kid Icarus reaches those heights. And so I will say I played quite a bit of Kid Icarus on the NES when I was a kid. It was hard as hell, but I certainly liked it and appreciated what it was going for. I certainly could never beat it, that's for sure. Kid Icarus Uprising on the 3DS, I played, I loved. I don't care that the controls were weird and you needed that stupid goofy little stand to hold the 3DS. It was strange, but I loved what they were going for. And the production value on that game is amazing. Great graphics, great gameplay, a ton of voice acting and story, and a really cool, like, online component. Like, what a weirdly awesome game Kid Icarus Uprising was on the 3DS, man. And so, I would like to see Kid Icarus come back in some form. If they want to revisit its 2D roots and kind of do something like some of the more recent Kirby games that were made in 2D. Metroid, of course, made the return in 2D with Metroid Dread. The Donkey Kong Country games on the Wii and the Wii U are good examples of revisiting 2D gameplay in a modern way. Super Mario Bros. Wonder, so they could give Kid Icarus the same kind of treatment as like Metroid Dread or Super Mario Bros. Wonder, or they could try to do something where they go down the Kid Icarus Uprising route, and I'm not talking about a port, even though I would love to see a port of that game, like an HD port. I'm talking about a new entry, and wouldn't it be amazing to see Kid Icarus get some kind of a massive, significant revival on the Switch 2? I would love to see it, and I think there's a slight chance it will eventually happen. And you know what else I want to see come back? I want to see WaveRace, damn it. I love WaveRace. WaveRace on the Nintendo 64, I could be wrong, but I want to say that was like the third game that ever released, because the 64 launched only with 2 titles, Mario 64 and Pilotwings 64, and I remember WaveRace really early on, so I want to say that was like in the first like 3 to 5 games that released for that console. Loved it back in the day, spent so much time playing it. WaveRace Blue Storm on the GameCube, that was the first game I bought with my GameCube, and I loved it. It was very, very hard. And I actually bought another copy for myself like a year or two ago and got back into it for a little bit. Man, that game is tough. But it's so fun. It's just so unique and it's beautiful. Like, both games, respective to when they released, were fantastic visually. And it's just, we talked about how F-Zero has that kind of racing arcadey sort of feel. That's exactly what WaveRace is. And I think that WaveRace it's time for it to make its return. And I would love to see that as an early on Switch 2 game, similar to how WaveRace and Blue Storm were early on for their respective consoles. Why not do the same for another new WaveRace game? You probably don't have to put a whole hell of a lot of money into it, and I bet if that game sells 1 million to 2 million copies, it would be profitable. And, I can keep beating the NSO drum. You could make an online mode and keep releasing games that make people want to subscribe to NSO. So I just would love to see that really fun, simple, but addictive game and franchise return. Like I said, I loved the first releases for their consoles, and I would just be so happy if WaveRace made a return on the Switch 2. And speaking of Pilotwings 64, that's actually the last franchise and IP that I want to talk about, is Pilotwings. There are 3 Pilotwing games to my knowledge. Pilotwings on the SNES, which was the first, Pilotwings 64, which I just love so much, and there was the Pilotwings game on the 3DS that, sadly, I never played. And honestly, talking about it today makes me think I might have to go to the retro store down the road from me and see if I can't get myself a copy of Pilotwings on the 3DS, because I kind of want to play more Pilotwings, and now I want to play it on the 3DS because that's one I never played. Either way, Pilotwings is a very weird game and a weird franchise for anyone who's never played it. It's all these weird, like, mini games around hang gliders and skydiving and shooting out of cannons and doing all these weird things, but it's got, like, a really chill vibe to it. It's got great chill music. It kind of works at your own pace, but it's also got really fun challenges that ramp up in difficulty. They're very unique, and I just think it would be a fun nod to classic Nintendo to bring back Pilotwings. I don't know if it would be a huge hit, and I wouldn't want them, this would be my one fear with Pilotwings. I wouldn't want them to, like, meify it, if that makes sense. I don't want them to bring it back and do some, and give it the kind of Wii Sports or Switch Sports treatment, and I wouldn't want them to give it even like the 1-2 Switch kind of treatment. Like, you can say that it's already kind of built around the concept of mini games, and that's not wrong, but I don't want them to go down that route. I want them to harness the excellence of Pilotwings 64 and just kind of amplify that tenfold for the Switch 2 with better graphics and music and all that stuff and a ton of different games. Maybe there's online leaderboards, whatever you have to do. But I don't want it to become like a me kind of a game. You know, I mean, to give them credit, even if they did, they could still make it really fun. And so I'm not even saying that I wouldn't buy it, but I would like it to retain its identity. Like, the Pilotwing games, at least 64, which is the one I'm most familiar with, had its own characters. And you're not getting to know the characters. They just have different stats and different weights and physics, and they've got unique looks. And, like, those characters are those characters. And so I would want them to bring it back and don't make them generic Wii characters. I don't want to play as my own me. I want to play as the characters you designed for a new Pilotwings on the Switch 2. And so I hope that they just commit to that sort of format. And they could just make it so fun. It could almost have a cozy game kind of vibe to it. And I don't play what are considered cozy games personally. But if they made a Pilotwings game for the Switch 2 and it had that cozy games vibe, man, let me tell you, I'll be there day one with my hot cocoa on a snowy night playing the hell out of some Pilotwings. So that's 6 franchises and IPs there that I discussed about wanting to see return to the Switch 2 and the varying levels of which I think are possible and not possible. Donkey Kong to me is almost a lock. Star Fox is probably the closest behind that. And then the other 4, you know, you can kind of take or leave how likely they are. But these are the franchises I wanted to focus on today, mostly through my own lens and the stuff that I would like to see as a fan. I know a lot of people will bring up things like Star Tropics, or even like Punch-Out, which I think would be a great candidate. You know, and plenty of other different kinds of franchises that maybe I haven't thought to bring up. Geist was like a really unique, weird one-off on the GameCube, for example. And sure, I would like to see a variety of these. You know, Star Tropics isn't really for me, but if they made a new Punch-Out, I would certainly be curious. I love the original Punch-Out for sure. So there's other franchises you could talk about, but these are the ones I wanted to focus on. I think all of these could be really successful and really fantastic. They deserve a return. That's the big thing, is talking about franchises that I also think deserve a mighty return to the spotlight. And coming off of the massive success of the Switch, these are franchises that didn't get revived on the Switch. And again, I know F-Zero 99 exists, and I know that Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze and DKC Returns got their HD ports, but I'm talking about new, true mainline entries and returns to form. So these are the ones that I think deserve their return to the spotlight in a more traditional fashion, with main entries on the Switch 2, man, to pump your next generation, continue the hype and success of the Switch going into the Switch 2, showcase the incredible power and graphics we know the console will have. These are games and franchises that I think will work really, really well. So, speaking for myself, as a game fan, as a Nintendo fan, and as a fan of the 6 franchises I talked about today, I hope we see one, some, or all of these make their triumphant return on the Switch 2.